Chapter 21. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Shameless Woman Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Tang Tang was brought home by Fangya. After washing up, she sat on the small chair and waited for Fangya's reprimanding. Fangya looked at her pitiful appearance and did not know where to start. She asked, "What's going on?" Tang Tang raised her head to look at Fangya and asked carefully, "Mom, will you promise not to be angry if I tell you?" "I can't promise that." Fangya directly refused her. Tang Tang frowned and hesitated for a moment before saying, "Okay. Then let me tell you this, you can't get too angry." Tang Tang took a step back and said. Fangya sighed and said, "Okay. Mommy won't get too angry." Tang Tang then revealed a sweet smile and continued, "Today, Little Rock scolded me for being a fatherless child." When Fangya heard this, she frowned deeply. She did not stop Tang Tang and allowed her to continue speaking. "I do have a father. So I told Little Rock not to speak nonsense." The way Tang Tang argued was actually somewhat similar to Fangya. "Little Rock did not listen to me and kept shouting," Tang Tang said with some grievance. "He said that Mommy is a bad woman." Tang Tang said with more grievance, "He said that Mommy and Daddy divorced. He said that all women who are divorced are bad women." Tang Tang looked at Fangya with some doubt. Then, she continued, "He also said that Tang Tang would become a bad woman if she followed Mommy. I was so angry that I went up and pushed Little Rock." Tang Tang said and reached out her hands to make a pushing gesture. "But he's so strong, he didn't move, he pushed me back and I fell." Tang Tang pouted. Then, a big brother came over. Tang Tang's eyes immediately lit up. He heard Little Rock's words and told Little Rock not to talk nonsense. But Little Rock didn't listen and even called that big brother a motherless child. Tang Tang raised her nose and looked very angry. Big brother got very angry. He pressed Little Rock down so that he couldn't talk any more nonsense. Tang Tang said as she made a downward movement with her hands. She did not forget to sit on the chair in order to reenact the scene as best she could. Little Rock said that Big Brother's mother ran away with someone else. That he's a wild child without a mother. Tang Tang said with a somewhat sad expression. Then, she waved her fists excitedly. Big Brother pressed Little Rock down and they started to fight. Then, after Big Brother finished beating Little Rock, he asked me to go over and beat him up. Tang Tang showed Fangya a row of white teeth. "I beat Little Rock up," Tang Tang said as she raised her little fists. When Fangya heard Tang Tang's words, her heart ached. Although she knew that it was wrong for her daughter to beat someone up, the damage that the other party had caused to her daughter could not be ignored. Fangya decided to have a good chat with Little Rock's parents. After all, most of the things that a child would say had a lot to do with their parents. After dinner, Fangya brought Tang Tang to Little Rock's house. On the way, Fangya kept saying to Tang Tang, "Even if Little Rock said something that you don't like to hear, you shouldn't hit him, right?" "Yes." Tang Tang promised. "So, we have to apologize to Little Rock." Fangya persuaded Tang Tang again. "Will Little Rock apologize to me?" Tang Tang asked back. "He said something that hurt you, so of course, he has to apologize to you." Fangya promised solemnly. "That's good." Tang Tang finally followed Fangya to Little Rock's home willingly. The two of them walked to Little Rock's door and knocked. Little Rock's mother opened the door from the inside. When she saw that it was Fangya and her daughter, her entire face flushed red. "You beat up my son, and you still dare to come knocking on my door?" Little Rock's mother roared angrily. "You beat up such a young child." The more Little Rock's mother spoke, the angrier she got. She stepped forward and tried to pinch Tang Tang. Fangya quickly shielded her daughter behind her and asked, "Is Little Rock all right?" Little Rock's mother's face was filled with malevolence as she roared, "All right. Try getting beaten up. You guys are too vicious." Little Rock's mother roared angrily, "A daughter brought out by a shameless mother is definitely shameless. How can you talk like that?" Fanya frowned as she looked at Little Rock's mother. "Did I say something wrong?" Little Rock's mother was even angrier. "You were dumped by your husband. You came here, pretending to be a saintess." Little Rock's mother's tone became worse the more she spoke. "Bah!" Fanya bit her lower lip and took a deep breath, trying hard to control her emotions. Chapter 22. You are listening at novelfull.audio. I beat them up. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Fanya had wanted to reason with Little Rock's mother, but the other party was not exactly amicable. Fanya shrugged and planned to leave with Tang Tang. She did not want Tang Tang to suffer here. Little Rock's mother was unwilling to let her go. She grabbed Fanya and refused to let go. "If you don't apologize to my son today, everyone will hear of this." Little Rock's mother shouted loudly. Her voice sounded somewhat anxious. Fanya frowned as she looked at the other party grabbing her hand. "Please let go." Little Rock's mother did not intend to let go. She continued to shout angrily, "You're as shameless as your daughter. How dare you bully my son?" Little Rock's mother raised her hand and was about to grab for Fanya's face. "Stop." A male voice sounded, shocking Little Rock's mother. Fanya and Little Rock's mother subconsciously turned their heads to look in the direction of the speaker. They saw a man walking over with a little boy. He-Fong. When Fanya saw that it was He-Fong, she couldn't help but feel a little puzzled. "Why are you here?" He-Fong walked forward and glanced at Little Rock's mother before saying to Fanya, "My son beat someone up. I brought him here to apologize." "It was your son who beat up my son." Little Rock's mother's voice rang out once more as she glared angrily at He-Fong. Following that, she looked down and stared at He-Peng. "It was you who beat up my son. Good. Good to see you two being acquainted as well." Little Rock's mother saw He-Fong and Fanya greeting each other and immediately reacted. She looked at He-Fong and then looked at Fanya before taking 2 steps back. "The two of you are ganging up to bully our family." The more Little Rock's mother spoke, the angrier she got. She pointed at the two of them with a trembling finger. Then, she let out an earth-shaking cry and sat on the ground. "Help! They're bullying us." Fanya was about to explain when the neighbors rushed out. "What's wrong?" A woman who lived on the right side of Little Rock's house ran out first. "The two of them are ganging up on us, orphans and widows." Little Rock's mother was already crying. Seeing this, the woman quickly reached out to pull Little Rock's mother up. "Get up first, the ground is cold." Little Rock's mother completely ignored her and waved her aunt's hand away. "How am I supposed to live? I can't live like this anymore." She slapped her thigh with all her might and wailed. "Our men died too tragically. All of you are here to bully us." Little Rock's mother shouted louder and louder, and she fell into a state of madness. "I don't want to live anymore." The neighbors who heard the sound stared at Fanya and He-Fong, thinking that they were the ones who had joined hands to bully them. Fanya sighed helplessly and hugged Tang Tang tightly in her arms. Her daughter was still young, and such a wail could easily scare her. Faced with the people around them pointing at them, Fanya and He-Fong tried to explain themselves, but there was nothing they could do. Not long after, someone invited the director of the neighborhood committee over. When the director saw that it was Fanya, he could not help but be a little surprised. "What's going on?" The director looked at Little Rock's mother, who was slumped on the ground and had already wailed herself out of breath. When Little Rock's mother saw that the director had arrived, she suddenly stood up and grabbed the director's hand. "These two are ganging up to bully me and my son. You have to stand up for us." Little Rock's mother used her sleeve to wipe away her snot and tears as she continued to speak. My man died because he wanted to build a road for our city. Little Rock's mother grimaced and cried. The government simply abandoned his widow and orphan. When the neighborhood committee director heard Little Rock's mother's words, he could not help but frown. Get up first and speak clearly. The director's arm was hurting from Little Rock's mother's grip, and his frown deepened. Little Rock's mother turned to look at Hifeng and Fangya. The two of them beat up my son. When the director heard this, his brows furrowed even more. Such a thing happened. At that moment, Hifeng stood up and said to the director, I beat him up. It has nothing to do with my father and this lady. Although Hifeng was not an adult, he was reading the situation particularly well. When the director saw this, the stiff expression on his face eased up a little. Tell me, what exactly happened? Hifeng explained in detail what had happened during the day. When everyone heard this, their gazes on Little Rock's mother changed from sympathy to reproachful. He's talking nonsense. Little Rock's mother refused to admit what Hifeng said. Whether he's talking nonsense or not, why don't you call Little Rock out and ask him? The director looked at Little Rock's mother and said. Little Rock's mother was hesitating when a bystanding woman said, I'll go. Chapter 23. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Is my son in the wrong? Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Little Rock had heard the commotion outside and was hiding in the house, not daring to make a sound. It was not until the woman entered the house and pulled him out when he rushed into his mother's arms. Little Rock's mother hugged her son tightly. Don't even think about bullying my son. The director could not help but sigh. No one wants to bully your son. Since everyone is here, just say it clearly. The director looked at Little Rock's mother and said earnestly. Little Rock's mother still looked at the crowd with a guarded expression. Little Rock lowered his head slightly and looked up, as if he was afraid to face the crowd. Little Rock, come, the director said and stretched out his hand towards Little Rock. Little Rock continued to hide behind his mother in fear. He looked both wronged and afraid. The director frowned slightly. After thinking for a moment, he asked, Little Rock, were you beaten today? When Little Rock heard this, he nodded his head heavily. Then tell me, who beat you up? The director asked again. Little Rock thought that the director was here to avenge him. He immediately mustered up his courage and pointed at Hifeng. It was him. After that, he pointed at Tang Tang. And her. Her. The director was a little surprised. The surrounding people also looked at Little Rock in confusion. That's right. Little Rock said fiercely. I only said a few words to her. She called that big guy over there to beat me up. Little Rock said angrily, his eyes showing hatred. When the director heard this, he thought for a moment before asking, what did you say about her? Little Rock snorted contemptuously, I spoke the truth. Her mother is indecent and seduced a wild man. Hearing Little Rock's words, everyone was in an uproar. The director's brows furrowed even more tightly, his gaze slightly cold. Who taught you to say these words? Little Rock snorted and did not look like a child at all. He put his hands on his waist and said, does this need to be taught? Isn't that what they all say? The director took a deep breath and looked coldly at Little Rock's mother. Is this how you teach your son? Little Rock's mother looked at the director's gaze and could not help but shrink back a little. Then, she seemed to have thought of something. She puffed out her chest and said, what my son said isn't wrong. She is a divorced woman. She is here with a child. Little Rock's mother said and snorted disdainfully. I heard that recently, someone has been introducing men to her. Little Rock's mother looked at Fangya with contempt. What did my son say wrong? Little Rock's mother said righteously. The director looked at Little Rock and her son in disbelief. The surrounding neighbors also did not expect Little Rock's mother to actually educate her son this way, and they could not help but take 2 steps back. Everyone whispered and pointed at Little Rock and her son. Little Rock's mother was suddenly furious. Did I say something wrong? That woman doesn't know how to live with her man. She's just indecent. Little Rock's mother said angrily. The director looked at Fangya and sighed. Take your daughter back first. It's late. The child is tired. I'll take care of the matters here. The director's voice carried a hint of apology. Fangya shook her head gently and said, It's okay. Tang Tang really did strike Little Rock, so we were here to apologize. As Fangya spoke, she looked at Tang Tang in her arms. Tang Tang looked at Fangya in confusion, then looked at Little Rock who was glaring at her angrily from afar. She shrank back in fear. Fangya patted her back encouragingly. Tang Tang took a deep breath, mustered up her courage, and took a step forward. Little Rock, I'm sorry. Little Rock still had a righteous look on his face. He glared at Tang Tang and said, Your apology won't change the fact that you hit me. You. Little Rock wanted to say something, but Hefeng, who was beside him, picked him up. Let go of my son. Little Rock's mother saw this and pounced forward, wanting to tear Hefeng apart. Hefeng used one hand to restrain Little Rock's mother. If you don't know how to raise your son, I'll help out. Hefeng's voice sounded cold. Little Rock's mother was instantly frightened. The next second, she wailed loudly again. Help! Murderer! Hefeng completely ignored Little Rock's mother's panicked wailing. He said coldly to Hefeng, You hit someone. Apologize. Hefeng pursed his lips. Although he was unwilling, he still lowered his head and apologized. Chapter 24 You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Hero Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Hefeng grabbed Little Rock by the back of his neck and lifted him up, swinging him in the air. However, he did not surrender. Instead, he desperately waved his arms and legs, trying to attack Hefeng. With Hefeng's skills, how could Little Rock accomplish anything? Since Hefeng has apologized, this matter will come to an end, Hefeng said simply. Impossible. Little Rock's mother screamed, You'll pay for my son's medical expenses. I'm not done with you. Little Rock's mother rushed forward again, wanting to save her son. Okay. Then let's go to the Public Security Bureau to continue settling this. As Hefeng said this, he turned around and left with Little Rock. Little Rock's mother jumped in fright. Looking at Hefeng's back as he left, she even forgot to cry. The director took a few steps forward and stopped Hefeng. Captain He, this is a child's matter. You see. Hefeng turned to look at the director. If this child is left alone, he will become a scourge when he grows up. You dare to call my son is a scourge. Little Rock's mother rushed over again. The director felt a headache coming on as he forcefully pulled Little Rock's mother back. He said to a few people who were watching the show, Send her back. The people around did not dare to go forward rashly, afraid that Little Rock's mother, who was in a frenzy, might accidentally hurt them. The director was helpless and said to Hefeng, Captain He, wait for me for a moment. I'll take care of this and come over immediately. Hefeng did not say anything, but he did not continue to leave either. When the director saw this, he inwardly heaved a sigh of relief. He called out to the few men beside him who pulled Little Rock's mother into the house together. At that moment, a woman came forward, wanting to help. The director said to the woman, Watch her well. Don't let her cause any more trouble. The woman nodded, knowing that Hefeng was not someone to be trifled with. After the director had taken care of Little Rock's mother, he quickly walked towards Hefeng again. Captain He, look at Little Rock. Hefeng looked at Little Rock, who was still kicking the air non-stop, and asked the director, if this child is allowed to continue like this, who would set him straight? The director also had a troubled look on his face. But, Little Rock's father passed not long ago. The wife and son are hurting. The director did not know how to explain and could not help but sigh. The tragic experience is worthy of sympathy, but this is not a reason for him to do whatever he wants. He Feng emphasized again. The director sighed helplessly and said, I will contact the child's grandmother later and ask her to bring the child back for a period of time. He Feng replied with an affirmative grunt and said, I'll bring this child back first. Let his grandmother come to my house to bring the child back. The director wanted to stop him, but he knew that there was no way to stop him at this moment. Feng Ye looked at the director's troubled expression and took 2 steps forward. She said, why don't we leave the child at his aunt's house first? That when the director heard this, he immediately clapped his hands and said, all right. His aunt is a primary school teacher in our area. She will definitely teach him well. The director said with some excitement. Moreover, she lives just around the corner. His mother won't have much to say. The more the director thought about it, the more he felt that this was a workable solution. The director called a few people next to him to go into the house and call the child's aunt out. Little Rock's mother's cries continued in the house for a long time. In the dark night, they rang out with exceptional clarity. When Little Rock's aunt came out, the director told her about Feng Ye's suggestion. The aunt did not have any objections. She only said that Little Rock often stayed over at her house for a few days. After settling on the plan, the director entered the room and began to work on Little Rock's mother's thoughts. Little Rock's mother stayed at home all year round to take care of the children. She was originally a gentle and kind woman. But after her husband died, her temperament changed drastically. She felt that everyone was out to harm her and her son. The director asked the child's aunt to take care of the child for a period of time. Little Rock's mother thought that the director wanted her aunt to snatch the child, so she had cried and fainted on the spot. The director had no choice but to call Little Rock's grandmother in the middle of the night. His grandmother's house was not far away, so she quickly rushed over. With Little Rock's grandmother around, Little Rock's mother finally calmed down. Little Rock followed his aunt back home. The farce was finally over. Tang Tang hugged Feng Ye's thigh tightly the whole time. Her timid appearance quickly earned everyone's sympathy. He Peng, on the other hand, stood straight the whole time, looking very righteous. Feng Ye looked at He Peng and could not help but feel a little envious. It was this youth who would become one of the important generals who would defend the country in the future. She could not help but sigh in her heart. As expected, the nature of a hero was present from youth. From the looks of it now, this budding hero was already beginning to show signs of his future exploits. Chapter 25 You are listening at NovelFull.audio. You must work hard. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation, I'll send you back, He Feng said, looking at Feng Ye and her daughter. Feng Ye nodded, not rejecting He Feng's good intentions. On the way, Feng Ye and her daughter walked in front, while He Feng and his son walked behind. He Peng looked at Feng Ye's back and asked He Feng, is that my future mother? He Feng frowned and said, I'm not sure yet. You have to work hard. He Peng said in a low voice. Okay. He Feng replied without any hesitation. After walking for some distance, Tang Tang turned her head and looked at Feng Ye. Mother, did I do something wrong today? Feng Ye lowered her head and looked at Tang Tang. Did you apologize to Little Rock? I apologized. Tang Tang said seriously. Really? Feng Ye asked again. Sincerely. Tang Tang nodded heavily. Then you didn't do anything wrong. Feng Ye replied seriously. You realized your mistake and apologized sincerely. Feng Ye comforted Tang Tang's head. You didn't bring more harm to the other party, so you should be forgiven. Feng Ye comforted Tang Tang. Tang Tang looked at Fangya with a half-understanding look, then the corners of her mouth opened and she smiled gently. Fangya asked Tang Tang, "Are you tired? Do you want mommy to give you a lift?" Tang Tang shook her head. "Mommy is very tired. Tang Tang can walk on her own." The four of them walked all the way back to Fangya's house. When they reached the door, Fangya stood still and looked at He Peng. "You protected Tang Tang today. Thank you." He Peng scratched his head in embarrassment. "It's my duty to protect the weak." Fangya smiled in relief. Then, her gaze turned to He Feng. "Do you guys want to come in for a drink?" He Feng was about to refuse, but He Peng beat him to it. "Okay. Sorry to trouble you, ma'am. I'm thirsty." Fangya smiled and invited He Feng and his son into the house. He Feng's first reaction when he walked into Fangya's house was to be in awe of its cleanliness. It was the kind of cleanliness that his own house had never had before. He Peng looked at the little flowers that Fangya had planted in the courtyard and grew very curious. Fangya invited the father and son to drink some tea and eat snacks as they had empty talk. Tang Tang sat at the side and began to doze off. He Feng quickly took He Peng and left. When they walked out of Fangya's courtyard, He Peng's first reaction was to look at his father up and down. He Feng felt uncomfortable being looked at by his son. "What's wrong? You can do it." After He Peng said that, he strode in the direction of his own home. He Feng looked at his son's mischievous appearance and could not help but feel a little amused. After the farce, Fangya and He Feng grew more familiar with each other. Because Tang Tang liked He Peng very much, every time after school, she would always invite He Peng to her house to play. After going back and forth, He Peng would report to Fangya's house on time every day and return home after dinner. Occasionally, He Feng would come to pick up his son, and Fangya would generously invite He Feng in to have dinner with her. The large woman saw He Feng at Fangya's house a few times and found him quite handsome. It was needless to say how much she liked him. "Captain He, are you here to pick up your son?" The large woman greeted him warmly. He Feng nodded at the woman and replied, "Yes. Ma'am, I'm busy." The two of them walked away. The woman looked at He Feng's back, and the more she looked at him, the happier she became. "I've really introduced a good man to Fangya. This man is worth it," the woman said with a smile. Although Captain He had only been in office for a short time, his upright personality was very popular among the surrounding residents. In particular, although there were not many major cases in this place, there were a lot of cases of petty theft. Ever since He Feng came, those petty thieves seem to have been intimidated and have disappeared without a trace. Fangya prepared some fruits and placed them on the table. She glanced at He Feng and asked, "Is there something troubling you?" He Feng was about to drink from the cup when he heard Fangya's question and put the cup back. Fangya was not in a hurry and urged the two children to do their homework obediently. He Feng seemed to have sorted out his thoughts before he said to Fangya, who was walking over again, "There have been some problems recently." "But..." He Feng hesitated for a moment and did not know how to say it. Fangya smiled and said, "I know that you can't reveal too much about your work. If you feel troubled, I suggest that you go to Wu Wei village to have a look." The smile on Fangya's face was faint. When He Feng heard Fangya's words, he could not help but frown. "How did you?" Fangya picked up the glass of water and took a sip. "I heard from the large woman and the others a while ago that a few people acting strangely showed up in Wu Wei village. I don't know if it has anything to do with what you're worried about." The smile on Fangya's face did not diminish. There was nothing wrong with it. He Feng looked at Fangya suspiciously and then nodded. "Okay. I'll go to Wu Wei village to check it out." "Thank you." Fangya did not answer. She only raised the cup in her hand and accepted He Feng's thanks. Chapter 26. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Taking a lone translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Early the next morning, Feng and his men entered the village. To everyone's surprise, they actually solved the major property theft case that had remained unsolved for a week. Not only did they catch the thieves on the spot, but the thieves did not even have a chance to react before they were captured. After 2 consecutive days of follow-up work, Feng finally returned to his normal pace of life. On this day, he went to Feng Ye's house, as usual, to pick up his son. However, he found a man standing at the door of Feng Ye's house and banging on the door. "Feng Ye! Come out! Don't play dead inside." The man banged on the door fiercely and shouted loudly. The large woman who lived beside her had rushed out of her own courtyard. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" The man glared at the woman. "None of your business." The woman was shocked by the man's tone. She straightened her back and said, "You're making a racket outside my house. I am within my rights to stop you. I'm warning you. If you do that again, I'll call the police." The woman warned loudly. At that moment, Feng Ye opened the door from the yard. She glanced at the man and said to the woman, "Ma'am, I'm sorry to have disturbed you." The woman immediately walked forward and approached Feng Ye. "Are you okay? Don't be afraid. We'll call the police." The man did not seem to be worried about the mention of police. He folded his arms over his chest and said, "What? Were you hiding inside and waiting to die?" When the woman heard the man's unkind tone, her brows furrowed even more tightly. "How can you be like this?" The man snorted. "It's none of your business." When the woman heard that, she looked at Feng Ye in surprise. She lowered her voice and asked Feng Ye, "Your man?" Feng Ye shook her head, indicating that he was not. The woman frowned even more deeply. Looking at the man's casual manner, she was at a loss for words. Feng Ye raised her chin slightly and looked at the man. "What are you doing here?" The man stretched out his hand. "I heard that you got a lot of money from your divorce. Lend me 100,000 and 80,000 for the first use." "Lend?" Feng Ye's lips curled into a sneer. "Then give it." The man said impatiently. "Why should I give you money?" The expression on Feng Ye's face turned even colder. She stared at the man without blinking. "Don't King talk nonsense. Are you going to give it or not?" The man suddenly became irritable and raised his hand to grab Feng Ye. Feng Ye stepped back, but she was still within the range of the man's arm. Just as the man was about to grab Feng Ye, a man rushed up and grabbed the offending hand. Feng pulled the man to the side and looked at the man coldly. "What are you going to do?" The man felt the pain and grabbed Feng's hand with his other hand. "You! Let go of me first!" The man wailed. His body was almost twisted. "Who are you?" Feng tightened his grip and asked coldly. I'm her brother." The man said anxiously. He kept struggling. Feng's expression changed slightly. He looked at Feng Ye and asked, "Is that so?" Feng Ye shook her head but did not say anything. The man was so angry that he waved his hand and tried to hit Feng Ye. Feng Ye could not help but flinch and the large woman stepped in between them. Feng twisted his hand and pressed the man down. "Don't move." The man cried out in pain and immediately begged, "Oh, good sir. Spare me L.RG, little sister. Little sister." The man shouted in Feng Ye's direction. "Little Ye, help. I'm really her brother." The man explained again, "My mother is her stepmother. I'm really her brother." Feng and the woman looked at Feng Ye again. Feng Ye nodded slightly. Feng did not let go of the man and asked coldly, "What are you doing here?" "I heard that my sister got divorced, so I came to see her." The man said with a smile. "That's not what you said just now." The woman said without hesitation. "Hey, no. The man said and patted He Feng's hand on his shoulder, let go first, let go. He Feng still did not let go of the man. He only asked Fangya, how do you want this done? Fangya bit her lip, thought for a moment, and then said to the man, I won't give you money. Don't bother me again. The man wanted to say something else, but He Feng pressed down hard on his shoulder. He Feng asked coldly again, do you hear me? The man wanted to resist, but there was nothing he could do. He sighed. Hey, I hear you, I hear you. Let go of me first. Let's talk nicely. Chapter 27. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Thank God you're here, translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. He Feng let go of the man. The man was about to go back on his word again when he took in He Feng's uniform. He was stunned. It was only now when he realized that the person who had held him down was actually a police officer. The man cursed in his heart, I wonder where this B*TCH found herself a police officer to back her up. In short, today was not a good day. The man thought for a moment and said to Fangya, our mother told you to bring the child home for dinner when you have time. How long has it been since you've gone back? The man was suddenly energized. Even if she's your stepmother, you should at least have some respect. When Fangya heard the man's words, the expression on her face changed slightly. The man still did not stop ranting at Fangya, making her look like the unfilial daughter. Finally, the man had vented enough. Fangya asked coldly, how long has it been since you've been back? The man was stunned by Fangya's question. He focused and stammered, I just came from Mom's. Is that so? Fangya sneered, Wu Wei, act like an actual son before pointing fingers at me. Or, you should actually go visit her yourself first. Fangya said, as if she already knew everything. Wu Wei gritted his teeth. He had a feeling that Fangya seemed to know something. He cursed a few times in his heart, then spat on the ground, turned around, and left. I'll be back. When that time comes, I'll claim what my mother deserves. Wu Wei said as he jogged away. He Feng looked at Wu Wei's departing figure, his gaze changing again and again. Fangya looked apologetically at the woman. I'm sorry to have made you worry. The woman waved her hand. It's nothing. In the future, if this man comes again, knock on my door and I'll kick him out with my broom. The woman said fiercely. Fangya smiled and nodded, expressing her gratitude again. He Feng looked at Fangya, feeling that she seemed to be hiding something. He Feng shook his head to himself and decided that it was better not to interfere in other people's family affairs. He Ping pulled Tang Tang out of the house. Tang Tang looked at Fangya with curiosity. Mom, what happened just now? Was Uncle Wei here? Fangya smiled and nodded. Ms. Fang asked me to tell him to remember to go home if I ever saw him. Tang Tang pouted and said. Mom, did you tell Uncle Wei? Tang Tang asked anxiously. Fangya patted Tang Tang's little head and smiled. Mom already told Uncle Wei. Don't worry, Tang Tang. Tang Tang finally felt at ease. He Feng said to He Peng, let's go. I still have something to do today. Go home early. He Peng walked quickly to He Feng's side and thanked Fangya. Fangya looked at He Feng and thanked him again. Thank God you were there for today's matter. He Feng grinned and revealed a smile. It's okay, take care of yourself. Fangya nodded again to express her gratitude. Everyone left one after another. Fangya held Tang Tang in her arms as she stood at the entrance of her courtyard. Mom, what are you thinking about? Tang Tang asked curiously. I'm thinking that perhaps, this family really needs a man, Fangya said inside. That Wu Wei had been a hooligan since he was young, and after he grew up, he had only worsened. Back then, Xiao Xiang used the money from selling her daughter to find a wife for Wu Wei. She originally thought that after the couple got married, they would be able to look after each other, where at least their lives would be more stable. Who knew that they would be the most dysfunctional and fragmented of all families? Wu Wei's daughter-in-law was even more of a muddle-headed person than he was. The couple got together and spent every day thinking about how to get the family property from the old lady. Finally, they kicked the old lady out of their house. The couple then struggled with how to live their lives in the future. Wu Wei heard the news that Fangya and Tang Fu were getting a divorce. Although he did not know how much property Fangya possessed, with Tang Fu's strength, it was impossible for him to leave nothing for his ex-wife and daughter. Therefore, Wu Wei had rushed over to ask for money from Fangya. Who knew that a divorced woman like Fangya would have so many people on her side? Wu Wei was repelled. He gritted his teeth and cursed all the way home. Chapter 28. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Mother's Warmth Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Fangya brought Tang Tang to Xiao Xiang's house. Xiao Xiang was about to go out to buy groceries when she saw Tang Tang running towards her excitedly. She hugged Tang Tang, kissing her and smiling happily. Tang Tang happily rubbed her face in Xiao Xiang's arms, telling her how much she had missed not seeing her for nearly a month. Xiao Xiang carried Tang Tang up and looked at Fangya. Has everything been settled? Fangya nodded. She held something in her hand and gestured for Xiao Xiang to enter the house. Xiao Xiang carried Tang Tang back into the house, but she still refused to let go. She let Tang Tang sit on her lap. Looking at the intimate interaction between Xiao Xiang and Tang Tang, Fangya's view of Xiao Xiang suddenly changed. Once, Fangya had decided that Xiao Xiang was an unreasonable stepmother. However, at that moment, Fangya realized that Xiao Xiang was not unreasonable. It was just that she valued family more than anything else. At that time, Xiao Xiang did not treat Fangya as family, and Fangya had been just as cold to her. The two of them had been stubborn and refused to budge, letting the hate grow and fester for years. Now, Fangya had seen the light and finally realized Xiao Xiang's good qualities. After Xiao Xiang went through the vicissitudes of life, she finally realized that her only family was the mother and daughter in front of her. Fangya hesitated for a moment before telling Xiao Xiang about how Wu Wei had come to her house to cause trouble. When Xiao Xiang heard this, her first reaction was to ask if Fangya was hurt. Fangya was very touched by this. She smiled and shook her head, saying, coincidentally, my neighbor next door came to the rescue and Hifeng. When Xiao Xiang heard the name Hifeng, she felt that Fangya seemed to be hiding something. However, Xiao Xiang was more concerned about whether that bastard son of hers had done something irreversible. Did he really not hurt you? Xiao Xiang pressed again. No, Fangya replied solemnly. That's good. Xiao Xiang finally heaved a sigh of relief. However, she immediately said, if he harasses you again, you can call the police. Fangya could not help but be stunned when she heard what Xiao Xiang said. Xiao Xiang looked at Fangya's expression and smiled bitterly. Before he reaches the point of no turning back, it's better for you to arrest him. After listening to Xiao Xiang's words, Fangya finally knew that as a mother, her deepest love for her son was only to protect him. Fangya made a promise to Xiao Xiang that she would not let Wu Wei make any further mistakes. She looked at Xiao Xiang, who was getting thinner and thinner, and asked, I asked you to go to the hospital before. Have you been there? Xiao Xiang waved her hand and said, sigh. I'm old. What good would a hospital do? Fangya looked at Xiao Xiang disapprovingly. No way. I'll take you to the hospital after dinner. Xiao Xiang wanted to refuse but was stopped by Tang Tang's soft little hand. Miss Fang. You have to listen to mommy. Xiao Xiang looked at Tang Tang, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Then, she smiled. Okay. I'll listen to Tang Tang, okay. Tang Tang immediately smiled happily. Fangya heaved a sigh of relief. In her memory, Xiao Xiang had passed on only a month later with a sudden illness. If she went for a check-up now, they could possibly find something. After dinner, Fang Ye sent Tang Tang back to the fat aunt's house and picked Xiao Xiang up to go to the hospital. The hospital check-up took more than half a day, but fortunately, Xiao Xiang only had some problems with her heart and did not endanger her life. Fang Ye gave Xiao Xiang a bunch of things to take note of before she was finally chased out of the door impatiently by Xiao Xiang. Fang Ye stood at the door, slightly amused at herself. She had never had too much interaction with her mother. In her previous life, whenever she faced Xiao Xiang, the two of them had always been at loggerheads and never cared for each other. Even though Fang Ye had become a mother herself, she had never felt the care and love from her mother. Now, in her return to life, Fang Ye seemed to gradually feel the warmth of her mother from Xiao Xiang's body. Perhaps, this was the greatest gain of her life. When Fang Ye returned home, she found that Tang Tang had fallen asleep at the large woman's house. The woman pulled Fang Ye aside to talk about the recent events. It had been a few days, and He Feng had not come to Fang Ye's house to pick up He Peng. He Peng himself had not appeared either. Fang Ye was not aware of what had happened, but she heard from the woman that it seemed that He Peng's grandmother had come to her house to take the child away. I don't know what the child's grandmother is thinking, the woman said angrily. It was clearly her daughter who made a mistake and abandoned the child. Now she wants to take the child back. The woman became angrier as she spoke. This is simply unreasonable. The woman's entire face was red with anger. Fang Ye listened to the woman's words and thought about what she would have done if Tang Fu had come with her to snatch her daughter. She would never let go. From the depth of her heart, she heard this answer. Chapter 29. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. He Peng's Temporary Stay Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Over the next few days, Fang Ye was hesitating whether she should go and talk to He Feng. For one thing, although the two of them did not share a clear relationship at the moment, they were still relatively close friends, so it was only right for them to lend a hand if they were in trouble. Before Fang Ye went to look for He Feng came over first. That night, Fang Ye had just coaxed Tang Tang to sleep, and she had packed her things and was prepared to sleep. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door, giving Fang Ye a fright. Who is it? Fang Ye asked, not daring to open the door. He Feng's voice came from outside. Fang Ye, I have something to trouble you with. Fang Ye heard that it was He Feng's voice, so she went forward to open the door. Why are you here so late? What's the matter? Fang Ye looked down. He Peng was also with He Feng, and he had brought a lot of things with him. Fang Ye looked at He Feng in confusion. What's wrong? He Feng hesitated for a moment before saying, Can I trouble you to help take care of little Peng for a few days? Fang Ye nodded subconsciously and said, Come in first. He Feng took He Peng and followed Fang Ye into the courtyard. Fang Ye tidied up a room at the side and let He Peng wash up before going in to rest. He Peng looked a little tired. Without any objections, he went into the bathroom to wash himself clean and then went to his room to rest. After settling He Peng down, Fang Ye walked to He Feng's side and asked, What exactly happened? He Feng looked at Fang Ye with a troubled expression. There were some things I didn't tell you about my divorce before. Fang Ye did not speak and quietly waited for He Feng to continue. Little Peng's mother. He Feng said. He hesitated for a moment before saying, She left in a hurry. At that time, my mother. Law did not know what happened, He Feng continued. A few days ago, she heard about our divorce. She thought that I might not be able to take care of the child by myself. She wanted to take the child back. He Feng's expression was very calm. But, I don't really want her to take the child away, He Feng voiced his true thoughts. Her family lives in the countryside, and the child has already started school, He Feng said seriously. It's very troublesome to transfer schools, and it's not good for the child's future development. So, I don't want the child to go with her, Hifeng said his opinion firmly. Then, he shrugged helplessly. But, the old lady is pretty stubborn. She thinks that I can't take care of the child well. Doesn't she know the reason for your divorce? Feng Ye could not help but ask. Well, not yet. Hifeng curled his lips and said. Then, you don't plan to tell her? Feng Ye asked tentatively again. There's no need. Hifeng smiled bitterly. The two of us don't have any foundation in our relationship, to begin with. All these years, I owe her a lot. Hifeng sighed and said, since she made a choice, I should respect her. Moreover, if this matter is spread to her family, her parents might have a hard time living. Hifeng guessed the most likely outcome. Feng Ye listened to Hifeng's words and could not help but feel a little heartache. This man was wholeheartedly thinking of a woman who had cheated on him. Feng Ye did not know if this man had the woman in his heart. Or was it just him feeling guilty for not giving enough? You plan to let the child stay with me for a period of time so that his grandmother won't be able to find him. Feng Ye guessed Hifeng's thoughts. Ah. No. Hifeng said and scratched his head. It's because I've had a very difficult case recently. I really can't take care of him. I can't let his grandmother use this as a reason to take the child away, so I can only trouble you. Hifeng finished, looking full of anticipation. Feng Ye took a deep breath and said, it's a sound idea. I'm more than happy to take care of Xiaopeng. But I don't agree with your way of handling the relationship between you and your ex-wife. Feng Ye expressed her opinion. Hifeng looked at Feng Ye and waited silently. I think her parents have the right to know the truth, Feng Ye said seriously. Moreover, you are obligated to tell them everything. Everyone should be responsible for what they have done. Feng Ye looked at Hifeng and smiled slightly. You don't have to take responsibility for her mistakes, do you? The smile on Feng Ye's face made Hifeng feel relieved. Chapter 30 You are listening at novelfull.audio. Please, save me. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Hifeng chatted with Feng Ye for a little while more before he got up to leave. Captain He. Feng Ye called out to his retreating back. Hifeng turned around to look at Feng Ye. Feng Ye smiled and asked, this latest case is the murder case in East City, right? You know of it? Hifeng looked at Feng Ye, confused. Feng Ye shook her head slightly and said, I just heard it in passing. Hifeng nodded and said, it's not safe for you to go out these days. You have to be careful. Feng Ye nodded and then asked, is the public security team also responsible for criminal investigation work? Hifeng looked at Feng Ye and said, they have to cooperate with the police. Also, I plan to apply for a transfer to the police's criminal division, so I hope to have more opportunities to gain experience, Hifeng said truthfully. He had originally planned to continue with Feng Ye, and it was a given for both parties to be honest and transparent with one another. Feng Ye recalled her past life for a moment. Hifeng had indeed transferred to the police's crime scene division after staying in the public security team for a short period of time. Moreover, after solving a major murder case, he had performed so brilliantly that he was given an exception and immediately granted the rank of captain in the police force. Feng Ye carefully recalled the whole story of that case in her mind. The thing that left the deepest impression on her was that the criminal had not only committed one crime in Dong City, but had killed a total of 7 people. However, the police only found the victims one by one after the man was arrested. That year, Hifeng, who had solved the serial murder case, suddenly became the #1 figure in the municipal bureau. Feng Ye secretly recalled the details of the case in the report. Are you sure there's only one dead person? Feng Ye asked. Hifeng looked at Feng Ye's face with a strange expression. Feng Ye smiled awkwardly and said, I just felt that this criminal seems to be very experienced. Fanya tried her best to act natural. He Feng still looked at Fanya carefully. After a while, he said, "So far, only one victim has been found." Fanya replied with an "oh," and did not dare to continue asking. "I will take good care of He Peng. Don't worry." Fanya made a promise and did not dare to meet He Feng's eyes again. He Feng smiled and turned around to leave. Over the next few days, she heard nothing from him. In just a week, the police found the bodies of 3 victims in 3 different places. All of a sudden, a murder case turned into a huge serial murder case. The city bureau paid more attention to it, and the whole city became vigilant. The woman did not forget to tell Fanya to be careful when she went out every day. She was beautiful and had 2 children by her side, so it was difficult not to attract the attention of shady individuals. Even if she did not attract a murderer, she was easy prey for other petty crimes. Other than thanking the woman for her concern, Fanya was not too worried. After all, in her previous life, she had also brought Tang Tang here by herself. Fanya had already gotten used to the days when she was alone with children. Apart from working at the neighborhood committee every day, Fanya's life was otherwise uneventful. Ever since He Peng moved into Fanya's house, he took on the responsibility of taking care of Tang Tang every day. Tang Tang had grown very fond of this big brother figure. She pestered He Peng every day to have him play with her. Although Fanya was not used to her daughter not pestering her anymore, she also had more time to be alone. Fanya wrote down some of the more important things from her memory in a notebook. These were related to herself and He Feng. She had lived a new life and many things about herself had changed. However, He Feng was moving forward just as before. One night, Fanya was packing her things at home when she heard someone knocking on the door. Fanya was puzzled when she heard someone shouting outside, "Fanya! Open the door." When Fanya heard Wu Wei's voice, her expression hardened. She walked to the door and opened it. "What are you doing here again? Fanya, please, save me." Wu Wei knelt in front of Fanya, his face damp with tears. Fanya looked at Wu Wei, but her expression was gloomy. "You gambled. How do you know?" Wu Wei looked at Fanya in surprise. "Who took you there?" Fanya asked coldly. "This." Wu Wei did not know how to answer for a moment. "Was it Tang Fu?" Fanya's voice sounded very calm, as if she had already guessed everything. Wu Wei reached out and grabbed Fanya's hands. "I beg you. Save me. I won't dare to do it again in the future. Although the 2 of you are divorced, at least you have been married for a few years." Wu Wei pleaded. "Beg Tang Fu to have mercy on me, okay?" Fanya refused him without hesitation. "No, I have nothing to do with him anymore." Fanya said firmly, "And I'm not starting anything with him again because of you." "Fanya, you can't just stand by and do nothing," Wu Wei said fiercely. His true expression was finally revealed.